From KNBC 9, Kansas City, this is Heart of the Matter.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm Cody Holyoke. The 2026 midterm elections are 450 days away. Normally, we wouldn't start talking about them this far out, but right now what we're seeing isn't normal. There's a concerted effort taking shape to stack the deck well before Election Day. It's blurring the lines between the White House and state governments and has huge implications across the country and here at home.
This is a completely corrupt process.
It started in Texas, where Democratic state lawmakers left their state to try and prevent Republicans from redrawing congressional maps at the behest of President Trump. Republicans are using time during a special session called in the wake of deadly flooding to try and swing 5 House districts in their favor before next year. But they can't do that without a quorum. The stalemate led Republican House leaders to threaten arrests and fines for missing lawmakers who say they're taking a stand.
We are using the power that we have as state legislators under the Texas Constitution to fight for our constituents.
Whether it's tomorrow or next week, the House will complete its required duties.
So here's the main issue. State legislatures typically take up redistricting once a decade after the census results come in. And Texas just did this in 2021. But now Republicans and the president, worried about the midterms, are trying to push an early vote through to try and secure a House majority more than a year before Election Day. You know, gerrymandering's been around for a long time, and a fight over congressional maps isn't anything new, but this early schedule is. And it's even prompting Democrat-run states to threaten a similar response, all while Republicans pressure other states to fall in line. And Missouri's no exception. There are 8 congressional districts in the Show Me state. Only 2 lean Democratic, near St. Louis and here in Kansas City. 3 years ago, Republicans tried to break up the Missouri 5th in KC, held for years by Congressman Emanuel Cleaver. And now, thanks to a White House push, that effort's gaining steam yet again. State Republicans say they're in talks now to try and push the adoption of a new map 7 years early, splitting the 5th among 3 adjoining Republican-leaning districts. The move would make it much harder for a Democrat to win, and critics say it would drown out voices of lower-income and minority voters.
Trump got 58% of the vote in 2024, but they are proposing that Republicans get 87% of the congressional representation with a 7-1 map. That's absurd. That's not representative democracy.
It is kind of an unprecedented move to do this, mid 10-year process of the census. But again, I think we got it wrong initially.
For any of this to happen, Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe would have to call a special session. He told reporters the White House has contacted him, and he said he'd consider the options. Let's get to the heart of the matter with our roundtable of journalists. Please welcome KNBC 9 political reporter Michael Mahoney and Rudy Keller, deputy editor with the Missouri Independent. Thanks for being here, gentlemen. This isn't the first time that we've even covered a fight over the 6-2 map or a 7-1 map favoring Republicans in Missouri. But Rudy, the way that we've gotten here feels like new territory.
Yeah, it is new territory. There hasn't been a redistricting of the state between censuses since the 1960s, and that was caused only by a U.S. Supreme Court decision that required that districts within states be more equal in population to better represent, give people one person, one vote.
Really wondering what other states might try to fall in line with this push from the White House, too, Mark.
Well, there are several, not just Texas and not just Missouri, but there are efforts underway in New Hampshire to do this, where they have no Republican members of Congress, and in South Carolina, which is a very Republican state, but they do have one Democratic-leaning district that stretches from Charleston into the center part of South Carolina. And there are other states that are talking about this, including some Democrats that are saying if this is going to happen with Republicans, we're going to redistrict for a Democratic seat. So this is something that's evolving and going to be a big political story for a while.
Yeah, we did reach out to Congressman Cleaver, who of course would be affected by any changes in Missouri. He told us he's worried many of the people he represents would lose representation if Casey lost a Democratic district, and he's calling out Republicans for even thinking about doing this.
There's fear among the Republicans that they're going to lose the House. So rather than try to correct that by policy, they are doing it in a really politically ugly way, and it's what causes people to hate politics and government.
Yeah, interesting argument, Rudy, that this is souring the voting base as well. We know the Legislative Black Caucus late last week also spoke out about this.
Yeah, and they're feeling that they're representation is being diminished. The representation of Democrats and the people that have those views will be diminished. Representative Awney is right that right now we have 75% of the delegation is Republican. Two of the 6 are Democrats. Missouri gets about 50% of its, of the vote. 58% goes to Republicans, but only 25% of the delegation is Democratic. So it's really a smaller portion, and it's because of where they're located. Democrats are concentrated in the state's big cities, so it becomes an issue for them.
For context, let's put up the balance of power for the House right now. Republicans hold 219 seats to the Democrats' 212 with 4 vacancies. That is an extremely narrow majority. And, typically midterms, Mahoney, are seen as a referendum on the president. Are Republicans worried that they can't win unless they change the maps?
Well, they're very concerned about holding on to their majority. And there are really 2 reasons to redistrict a state. Number one is to reflect the population shifts. And the other one, quite frankly, is a power grab. And as Cleaver said, and I agree with him on this, this is an effort for a power grab. And when you talk to and listen to Missouri Senate Republicans in particular, they say, yeah, we want to represent more people because we believe that we're entitled to it, and we've got the votes. So we'll see where this goes. The other thing is what happens with Mike Keogh. Keogh last week at a news conference in Columbia indicated that he is seriously considering calling this special session. Now, whether it would be in September with the veto session or at some other time, that remains to be seen. But it looks very likely that there's going to be an effort to make the Missouri Congressional District from 6-2 down to 7-1, and the Republicans think that they have the votes, especially in a special session where the rules are a little bit different.
Rudy, real quick, what should we be watching for here in the next few weeks?
Well, first of all will be the governor's decision on this. And secondly would be the commitment of Republicans to this. The only way that this is going to get past the Missouri Senate is they're going to have to use the motion to shut off debate that they used at the end of this year's regular session to put a repeal of the abortion rights amendment and to roll back the sick leave law that was passed by voters last year. So Kehoe will have to get into the game by calling the special session. Many people think that, the fear of Trump calling him out on social media, potentially even endorsing an opponent in the 2028 Republican primary might be the way that this goes. And that's the thing that Kehoe will be most thinking about, will be his political future on this.
All right, we'll be watching closely. Rudy Keller, Michael Mahoney, thank you so much. Count on KMBC 9 News and Heart of the Matter for any updates from Jeff City and across the country. It's all on air and online at KMBC.com.